All right, my name is Blake Moore with the University of Delaware Cooperative Extension. I'm a natural resources agent. I'm also currently the outgoing chair for the Delaware Invasive Species Council. So today we're going to just talk about invasive species management and rights of way. I'm not going to go too heavy into detail on species themselves just because we have 20 minutes. But I am going to talk about some management options and how to go about planning for that. So I heard the question last time that we were here, what is an invasive species? Why do we care about invasive species? Great question. Invasive species are usually not from here. They don't have the checks and balances that plants do. You know, the predators aren't here, the diseases and things like that, they keep populations in check and keep that balance. They're just not here. So they go aggressive and they take over native plants. They cause sometimes issues in facilities like bamboo growing through walkways and in the foundations and things like that, just creating all different kinds of problems. Same thing in tax ditches and other kind of rights of way that we're talking about. And as you heard earlier, rights of way are basically just easements. So they are areas that need to be open for maintenance issues, or, you know, whether they're around stormwater ponds, ditches, utilities, things like that. You know, it's just there to be, there's just a little bit different maintenance issues depending on what's there. Utilities is another one. You know, you have your power line rights of way, creating a whole nother set of issues. And so I know I spelled management wrong here, but it still means the same thing. I was proofreading it while I was sitting here listening to the other ones. I have a few, but please forgive me for that. All right, so the foundation for invasive species management. So how to go about doing it. You know, maybe you're not doing it yourself, but being a more informed consumer, maybe you can help work through the process when you're dealing with your contractor or some other maintenance folks and understand kind of how they're going about it. First thing is setting the overall goal of the management site. What's it being there for? Is it a buffer, conservation area, stormwater management, tax ditch? Knowing kind of that overall goal is a good place to start. Then you want to do the site assessment, looking at your different soils and other things that are there that are going to affect what type of plants are going to be there and how you're going to manage it. Then we'll select control methods and set your expectations when you're going about it, depending on your capacity and your tools. We'll design and implement the control program, and then the long-term maintenance, what comes after that. That's one of the most important things. Okay, good, next. So the first thing is, what is the overall goal? As you can see here, I like to walk on trails with my dog. So this area right here is going to be managed a little bit differently than if you go 50 feet off of the trail. There's going to be different plants present. There's going to be different pressures present. So that type of thing is just there when you're going into the initial planning. Again, are you doing an interactive educational conservation area? Are you going to need it to be super maintained? You know, that might have a little bit more pressures there. You're doing wildlife habitat, community open space, stormwater management, or right of way. Here's a few examples. On the top left there is a stormwater management pond. It looks pretty good, but probably 2 months before that, it looked pretty awful with a lot of planktonic algae. That's a whole other thing that we can talk about managing. But you know, that's just an example of a stormwater pond and the different types of things that may go on in there. This is Dover High School in the center, for those who are online, the center picture. It's a big meadow out there. Doesn't look like it right there because they mowed it, and I'm not sure what time of year it is, but looks like hopefully they mowed it at the right time of year. But anyway, so that's a big area that's going to be different weed pressures, different invasive species. They're going to be present there than in the picture on the left and even the picture on the right. Picture on the right is a natural area, natural wetland, and one of Delaware Wildlands natural restoration areas that they have. So, I mean, different pressures, different types of things you need to worry about. Okay. All right, so site assessment. There's a lot of available technology these days that you can take a look at your sites. One of the things that I like to look at is what was the previous usage? You know, was it a farm field, forest, homestead, industrial, fallow land? What was there before? And DNREC has first map, it's public facing, and you can look at the different years of aerial maps all the way back to like 1937. And you can look at, I think it's 37, then into the 60s, maybe a few in the 90s, and then into the 2000s. So you can see how the land use has changed over time. And for those who are online, if you look at the picture on the right, this is the 2007 image of this area in question. It's up in Newcastle County off of Route 72 going towards Delaware City. You can see it was farmland. and you have the forested areas. So then the current piece is on the left. You can see that they've put buffers around that forest area. Massive amounts of buffers around there. And so you know that it's gone from farmland into buffers. So what types of different things can you expect to encounter? Johnson grass, Canada thistle, things that you would tend to find in farm fields. And then there's some other things too, but that previous usage, you can know that when I'm out here, I'm looking for Johnson grass. I'm looking for Canada thistle because it's most likely going to be there. You can also use the Delaware tax ditch map, as we were talking about, to look at the LiDAR data. And this is elevations. So it kind of can help you determine where your low areas are, if you have, like, if you're looking at the picture on the top right, can you really tell that there's water there? Maybe, maybe not. But down here in the LiDAR area, you can see that it's most likely going to be wet. Is it standing water? Is it wetland? You can pretty much tell with that, that LiDAR data. Were there previous management plans there? And what are some of the other stressors that you may deal with? We think about stormwater ponds and even some ditches, they can be completely bone dry and then all of a sudden hold water for months at a time. So it's going to be like, what do I do with this? And I don't really know. The management of invasives is easy to do in those types of situations, maybe, but being able to plant long-term successful plantings, those types of dynamic systems is going to be hard. Okay, we can go to next. And so we're looking at what's the current state of it. We've looked at the previous history, and now we look, what is it now? Developments. We've got a lot of developments that are on previous farmland. Some of them, unfortunately, may have been previously woodlands and things like that, different pressures. So just looking at the current state, comparing it to what it used to be. Is it aquatic? Is it terrestrial? Most of the time when I'm working in rights of way or anything that could possibly have water, I'm using aquatic safe herbicides, as was mentioned in the designer ditch program, just to make sure that you're not affecting anything with chemicals that weren't intended for that use. Okay, we can go to next. All right, so when you're doing your treatments, are there areas that are going to be especially at risk for erosion? As you can see up here on the top right, this is a recently replaced pipe. Those areas right there might need a little bit of attention to make sure that we're not losing any soils and sediment in there. Plantings. So say this area was completely covered in plants and you want, or invasive plants, say Phragmites, something like that. You treated it, killed it all. Maybe you cut it down. You want to think about things you can do in between that and repopulating with plants. So what I can do to make sure we don't lose that soil. Whether it's putting jute mesh down, whether it's putting a quick growing grass down, or some other things as you wait for your solution, whether it's seeding, whether it's planting designer ditches, things like that, to make sure that you can hold that soil. And why do we care about that? Obviously, soils getting into the ditches cause them need to be dipped out. If they make it all the way to some of the outlets, all the water here is either going to go, if it's not detained, it's going to have an outfall either in the inland bays or the Chesapeake Bay or possibly into Delaware Bay and Atlantic Ocean. So they're going somewhere, and sometimes those sediments can move. And what moves with sediment? Phosphorus moves with sediment, and so do pollutants. So if we can keep those sediments right where they are, that's going to help reduce the amount of maintenance required. And it's also going to reduce the amount of pollutants and sediment getting into our waterways. Let's see. Yeah, and again, is the treatment area involved with drainage or stormwater management? Some may need the immediate attention because of functionality. So as Wes mentioned, clogging pipes with parrot feather, he mentioned that. I think I have pictures next. So if you want to move to the next picture, not quite, it's after this, but we'll talk about the parrot feather in a second. And so while we're doing this, we know where we're at. We know what type of system that it used to be. We know what it is now. And now we're looking at what's there. What plant populations do we need to target? What do we need to take care of? Phragmites obviously is something you can find in stormwater management, rights of way, anything with a little bit of water in it. Phragmites can be there, salt, fresh, doesn't matter. Even seen it kind of getting into more upland areas, but it can't go too dry. But still, Phragmites, very hard to control. It's possible in small areas, especially if you're looking at that long-term maintenance afterwards. Okay, we go to next. So This is just a few species that I like to point out. I was asked, it's been a couple years ago, by the Delaware Online, what are the top 5 invasive plants? I was like, well, it depends on who you ask and what system that you're in. So rights of way, these are a lot of plants that you're going to see in rights of way. Top left is porcelainberry. I have a especially heavy distaste for this plant because my neighbor has it growing all in her yard. And every single one of my plantings in my yard, I'm pulling this all the time. I'm cutting it, treating stumps. It's nonstop. And this time of year, those berries are like that. So it looks similar to wild grape. Wild grape doesn't look like this. The fruits don't look like this. So if you see a vine out there growing all over everything, and it's got those berries on it right now, porcelainberry. Want to take care of it as soon as possible. Small populations are easier to handle. Bottom left is going to be Japanese knotweed. That's a particularly difficult one to manage along tax ditches, along some other ditch systems, stormwater management, just because of how it grows. It's colony forming, moving by rhizomes. Also, if you mow this plant, it can fragment and move down with mowing. So it can move down your whole system with mowing. So maybe the mowing isn't the best way. So just knowing that species, the management is going to be different. In the center of tree of heaven, obviously we've heard of spotted lanternfly recently. That spotted lanternfly is heavily associated with tree of heaven and needs it to actually, it's thought to need it for reproduction. So it's definitely one of those invasive species that's not just really aggressive, but it's hosting an invasive insect. Center right, we've got hydrilla. That's a submerged aquatic plant. So if you have a stormwater pond, I guess you might be able to see it in some ditches, but it has to be a slower moving ditch to see it there, but it still could be there. But definitely in stormwater ponds, and it can clog up your systems. It can take up your whole water column. It's an extremely aggressive plant, hard to manage as well. Top right, autumn olive, another one that you see a lot along rights of way, open space, things like that. It's a terrestrial shrub, moves by berries, moves very aggressively. It's really hard to control. And then bottom right is Canada thistle. Might have heard it called creeping thistle. It's also a noxious weed, so it's an agronomic weed that is up in the state. Not as heavy down in Sussex County, but it's another colony forming plant that really is aggressive and can overtake, and there's no succession involved with that. Once it starts taking in there, if you're not treating it, that's going to be what's there. It also spreads very readily by seed, blowing all over the place. So, okay, we can go next. Parrot feather on the left. That one is a rooted aquatic plant. It has a portion of it that's submerged, and then you'll see this top part is going to be above the water line. Very aggressive. Wes mentioned it in some of the tax ditches around Greenwood, and I do have pictures of a before and after of their treatment plan. Actually, Matt Messina with the projects group has been treating that. Also, kudzu is another vine that can be found here. I think there's only probably 15 sites throughout Delaware, but where they are, extremely aggressive. So it's not moving as readily, but it's definitely a plant that is, if it can escape, and if it does, extremely aggressive and can be hard to control. If you want to see a population of this, go to Blair's Pond in Milford. If you go down by the spillway, if anybody's familiar with it, on the left-hand side on your way down there, there is a population, and it was actually controlled before, but now it's come back with a vengeance. So if you just want to see an example of that, that's a good one to look at. Palmer amaranth is actually native to the United States from the Sonoran Desert in Arizona, but it's a heavy agronomic weed, and that's really where the most concern is there. But if you have an area that used to be agronomic and now it's turned into an open space, this may be a species that you have an issue with. So just be on the lookout of that. Okay, next. All right, so here's the parrot feather project. This is off of 16. Yep, so this is the ditch system, pretty big ditch system off of Route 16. It's actually used for, I think, if you go on the picture to the left here, if you go around that bend, it's used for irrigation there too. So that's another issue about treating this plant. But you can see the before and after. This is the same year, different perspective. So the left picture is looking north. This picture on the right is the same area, but we're looking back towards the bridge, which is south. And you can see that The treatment plan looked like it worked pretty well for that year. It does come back every so often, so the treatment plan needs to be on and on. So the key with this one is, if you look at the picture on the left and you have a huge storm event that comes through with a lot of flow, you go up the road there to Greenhurst Farm Road, there's a pipe system. You see the bridge system here. That's not going to be really, I don't think Parafeather's going to be able to wash that out. But the pipes along Greenhurst Farm Road, which is right around probably a couple miles away, that's actually gone out a couple times, and Parafeather has played a role in that, clogging it up and just having all that pressure blow out the road. So it's possible. We even saw down on Asbury, is that Asbury down here? There was a Asiatic dayflower growing in there. I've never seen it anywhere before except there. And it was an emergency dip out from that plant because it was threatening that system throwing out road pipes because it was just so heavy. This was probably 2019. But it's just another one of those things. Like, these plants come up, they grow quick, aggressive, and they can affect the functionality of these systems. Okay, next. So picking the top targets for control. So we've identified, now that we know our site, now we know our plant populations. Now we're going to look at which ones we need to control first. Again, depending on whether it's functionality, whether it's aggressiveness, and your goals. So there's different types of plants. There's herbaceous plants, which I spelled that wrong too, don't judge me. And then there's woody, and we've got dicots and monocots, which dicots is broadleaf plants and monocots are grasses. And so there are herbicides that can be selected depending on what type it is. And then we also have perennial, annual, and biennial. Again, those types of things can determine how you're going to treat your plants. So knowing that is pretty key. And that picture there is Phragmites roots. So they grow by rhizomes, and that's how they create their colonies. And you can see this is actually a really small root system, but they can go tens of feet down, and they spread laterally just as far as they have ability to do so. So I mean, those colonies get really crazy, and there's just no succession. So succession is like, you disturb an area, the initial early succession plants come up, then they keep on changing to the mid and then late. And eventually most places around here want to become forest again. Phragmites is not going to happen. They're going to be so tight in there, nothing is going to have succession. It's just going to stay frag. And then how is it spreading? Again, Phragmites is moving from rhizomes. Suckers are basically shooting clones up from the root system. Tree of Heaven and Bradford pear both do that. So if you cut them off, they're going to say, okay, we're going to shoot clones up. So now you've got 10 trees instead of just treating the one. So that's another reason to know how that spreads. Stolons is above ground stems that can root. So I'm trying to think of a good example of that. Bermuda grass, wiregrass, that's one that does that. So they grow in your turf. You'll see them, they'll shoot out here, they root, they root, they root. So if you kill the end of it, it's going to kill it back to the one root. And then that's pretty much all the kill you have. So you have to get that, you have to treat the whole plant if you want to get that done. Fragmentation, again, Japanese knotweed is one that does that. The Parafeather too. So if you go in there and you scoop out Parafeather, you're thinking you're doing something great. Now you just moved it down the ditch system. So picking that different type of treatment is what is good. Okay, good, next.
Are we?
Again,
Nope.
so what different types of control methods do we have at our disposal? Chemical, so herbicides, and I put algicides in there. Obviously stormwater ponds, I heard somebody mention that. Algicides is how you treat those, but that's a whole different topic. Herbicides, especially in dynamic systems, is probably one of the best ways to control. Even if you want to decrease the amount you use to begin the process, that's usually the first way to go. Mechanical, cutting and removing works for some. You have to deplete the root system, especially if it's a perennial. Annuals, that's actually a really good way to go about it, as long as you catch it before it seeds. So Japanese stiltgrass is one that you see in woods. If you get it before it seeds, you can pull it, you can mow it, and that helps keep it down. But if it gets seeded and then you mow it, you're just going to spread that seed all over the place. There's biological, so insects and diseases. those are really controversial, especially if you don't know exactly what those insects are gonna do somewhere else. But there is a lot of research going on with several different plant species, and I think I have some examples later on. And then cultural, so just basically how you're managing your land. Are you mowing it 2 times a year, 1 time a year? Are you burning it versus cutting dormant meadows? What types of different things you can do to kind of change up what you're doing? Okay. So licensing. So if you're treating areas on private land, on your own private land, you're not getting paid for it, your own private land, you don't necessarily need to have a license. But if you are doing it on any type of right of way, if you're doing it, getting paid to do it, you're gonna need to have a license. So 06 is right of way, and this is through the Department of Agriculture. You have to take a test to be able to get that. 5A is aquatic and 02 is forestry. If you're working in these areas, I would recommend having all 3, just to keep yourself covered. Plus, it's also good to learn the types of things that you're gonna be up against. Some of these sites, especially aquatic sites, may require permits. Yeah, that's a tricky one. You'd have to look into that, but like some stormwater ponds may require you just to give a notice of intent to treat those. And then I heard it mentioned earlier, labels the law. If you're using herbicides, read through them very, very well and make sure you're doing the right thing. I will also offer this: if you select a product, if you're doing it yourself and you're not sure, you'd like somebody to review it, I'd be happy to help. That's what we do at Extension, is we help with technical assistance and education outreach. So if you have one that you're not familiar with, we can work through that with you. Okay. So there's selective and non-selective. Selected, say you have a grass swale, or you have a grass buffer, and you have broadleaves coming up through there, such as Canada thistle, or let's just say Canada thistle is a good option. There are selective herbicides that you can do that you can actually spray over top, and it'll kill the broadleaf and not the grass. Triclopyr is a good example of that. And then also vice versa, grass can be selected out of a broadleaf planting. So if you have a pollinator planting and you have grass in there, some of the grasses may be able to be controlled with a selective. And then I put clopyralid on there. It's even more selective, where it only affects a few species of broadleaf plants, but it's expensive. So, but it's just there in case you have a real critical planting that you want to protect. Non-selective means you're going to spray it and it's just going to wipe it out. Everything there pretty much is going to get wiped out. Glyphosate, diquat, 2 different types that you could use. But again, there's still going to be some plants who are going to shake that off. Porcelain berry, I know you heard me mention that one. I hate glyphosate, doesn't work on it. You spray it, it might curl it up just a little bit, and it's like, now I'm good, and keeps on going. So knowing your plant also helps with that as well. Okay, next. And then again, contact and systemic. So contact means it's just going to kill what's on top, and it's not going to kill the root system. So for annuals, that may be okay, but if you're trying to attack perennials, you're going to want to go with systemic. So contact is diquat's a good example. Diquat, I mean, what, a day? Less than a day, maybe, depending on the species.
Depending on the species, the surfactant, and the heat of the
Right.
day.
Exactly. It's a really quick, it kills the top of the plant. So annuals it works well on. Glyphosate is one that actually goes through the plant, goes down into the root system, and kills the root systems for perennials. Okay, next. Timing. So perennials, a lot of perennials, it's best to treat them like now is getting towards the end of that window if they're still not dormant yet. But you're wanting it when the carbohydrates in the plant juices are going down to the root system. So those chemicals bind to that, get down in the root system, and give a good kill. So Phragmites, Canada thistle, and Japanese honeysuckle are good examples of that. Especially Japanese honeysuckle, it stays green longer than most. So if you have it along a ditch bank, it's possible that you might even be able to use a non-selective on that once it's still green and everything else is dormant. Woody species, there's basal bark treatments, which is treating a portion of the bark with herbicide, and it's got to be delivered with some type of oil-based surfactant, as Wes mentioned, surfactants, which is how it's a spreader sticker, so how it either penetrates the plant or how it stays on the plant. Surfactants are needed for some of those herbicides, and basal bark treatments are good. You can use those actually during the winter and in the fall. So if you want to wait when it's not 100 degrees out and you're sweating, that's a good time you can do that. Hack and squirt method is basically making cuts around the bark of a tree and treating. You only need to make the cut not too far in, just you don't need it into the heartwood, you just need it into where the xylem and phloem are, and get some chemical in there and it'll go down and kill the root system. And that compared to the cut and paint treatments. So you can cut some trees off completely, treat the stump, just the outer portion of the stump with a concentrated herbicide, it kills that plant. And again, those can be done pretty much any time of year except for the spring, because in the springtime, all those plant juices are going back up. So we need them to be going down. So if there's a lot of sap being created, going up into the plant, you don't want to do that in the springtime. And the difference is for hack and squirt. So we talked about those clones earlier. So tree of heaven or rapid repair, you don't want to use cut and paint because you cut it, you paint it, it might kill that main root system, but clones are going to be shot up from the other ones. So you want to use a hack and squirt because at that point, it's not really having that. It's not completely dead yet. It's not having that. It's going to have a delayed response to shoot up those clones. So hack and squirt is best for those types of things. Next.
I see we are at 11:30.
All right. You can keep going.
Okay.
We'll just go.
I
up
say
to-
these presentations will be available online and the recordings as well. Give
Sure.
it probably like 2 weeks or
Yeah,
so.
sure. You can keep going. We talked about some of this. Keep on going. Bios, keep going. Cultural control. Yeah, I had to throw that picture in there. And integrated vegetation management. I just want to see I spelled management correct this time, so I do know how to spell it. So integrated vegetation management means just using several different methods to control the species depending on what it is. So bamboo, you can actually cut it early in the season, treat regrowth. Go ahead and do next. And then you want to design your control program using all the things we talked about. Go ahead. Implement the plan, go ahead. And then post-treatment, you want to evaluate how it worked, but then you also want to implement long-term plans. Go ahead and go. Scouting, I just want to point out that scouting is going to be one of your most important tools. As Wes said, he walks the entire ditch systems of tax ditches once a year. That's great, but if you can even do it a couple more times a year, different, maybe in the spring, in the fall, because you may have different plant populations there, but scouting is the best because you're going to find the populations when they're small and it'll be easier to handle if they're small. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead. And so just in summary, I just wanted to kind of give you an overall view of how people approach it so that if you're going through those systems or if you're working with a contractor, you kind of understand where they are in the process, why they're making decisions of what they're trying to do. And we have some HOAs who have reached out to me who want to do their own management. So I've actually worked with a few who I've given them recommendations and they're attacking them themselves. So it's possible. Go ahead and go. And just real quick, additional information, Delaware Invasive Species Council, there's a lot of education outreach being done by this. I'm going to be selfish here and say that we have October 24th at Harvest Ridge Winery. We have a Delaware Invasive Species Council annual meeting with a full day of talks. So there's going to be pesticide applicator credits. There's going to be Mission Barbecue lunch, and there's going to be a social hour afterwards
So
too.
you piqued my interest.
Yeah, there you go. See?
Mission barbecue.
Yeah, exactly. And so then also I wanted to bring your attention to Delaware Native Species Commission. It was